Hi, welcome back to the Keys to Therapy. In today's episode, we're going to talk about what you talk about in sessions with clients. So, I know in a previous episode, I covered the assessment or intake, whatever you want to call it. But, after that, you've covered, a little bit of their entire life, right? Then, when you get to the next session, sometimes it's like, well, what do we talk about now? Where do we start? What direction do we go in from here? So it can be kind of tough to figure out what to say in the next few sessions, especially if you have a lot of stuff to work with. So this episode is going to cover a couple different options of, topics, of things you can use or discuss, and kind of help you guide some of these future sessions. I know most therapists, especially when you're newer and it's kind of all new to you, to figure out how to meet with clients consecutively, especially if it's like individual therapy. I know for me, every place I'd worked before, pretty much like internships and things like that, tended to be more like short term. So if I was in the hospital setting, well, I'd see that person for that week and they'd probably be gone by the time I came back the next week for the rest of my internship hours. Or you would do like a process group, or maybe like an intake session or a family session, or prepare them for discharge or something like that. But after that, it was done. So it was almost like, for the past places I'd worked, every session or every time I talked with a client, there was a very specific purpose to it. And it's the same way with like the intake session when you're doing individual therapy or family therapy or anything like that. After the first session, it's kind of on you. The first one's so guided with all these questionnaires and things that you have to ask to get a good history. And then with the second one, sometimes you're just like, how's your day? So it can get a little bit awkward as the therapist, and sometimes awkward for the client, because they're like, okay, cool, I did my part. I answered all your questions the first time. I'm back. Go ahead, do the therapy. Like, let's go. So I would suggest just kind of a couple different things. So the first one would be and this is how I do my first actual session, is I check in with them and I say, hey, I know last session was a lot. We covered basically your entire life. So how did you feel after the session? I think it's good to ask that type of question, because if somebody's never been in therapy or they opened up to you about some really heavy stuff, they may have still been processing some of that or feeling the effects of some of that for a while after. So I think it helps you as a therapist kind of gauge how the client handles therapy and how they handle certain situations. So then, depending on what they say, if they're like, oh gosh, it was kind of exhausting afterwards, then you can validate for them, like, yeah, sometimes therapy's tiring. Like, there's gonna be some sessions we dig into a lot of stuff and you're gonna be like, oof, I need a nap after this. And there may be days that we're just kind of talking about the stuff that's going on now and what's going well in your life, and we build on that. So sort of teach them a little bit about therapy and how you work and what to expect, because you're setting the tone for the relationship between you and them, and also for future sessions. So you still kind of want to give a little bit of, like, I guess, clarification, guidance in that first official session after the intake. I think it's helpful for them. Plus, it gives you a starting point. If they're like, oh, I felt fine afterwards, I thought the session went great, then you could say something like, oh, I'm so glad, like, you did really well answering all those questions, and I'm excited to work with you. And then that's where you figure out where to go. So you originally have two options. You could put on the client and you could say, like, so is there anything specific that you wanted to talk about today? Or is there any place that you wanted to start? That's one way to do it. And there's nothing wrong with that way. Like, that kind of lets some of the pressure off you as a therapist, but it also lets you know, like, what is important to the client. I know some people have, as clients, like, complained before and been like, well, I kind of wanted to talk about this thing, but then we kept talking about that thing. Or if you are maybe kind of helping with their avoidance unintentionally, if they tell you that first full session, like, yeah, I kind of want to talk about, like, that relationship with my mom as a kid. and then you see them like veer off and start going another direction, you've got like a point to bring them back to. Even if it's not that day, but in the future, be like, well, remember, like part of your goal was you really wanted to address that relationship. So let's get back there. And you're holding them accountable, which I think can be helpful too. But the way I would describe sessions, and this may be, again, helpful for the newer therapist, and you could take pieces of this and do what you want with it. And some of it you're going to use off and on. Some of you may use a lot of this with one client and none with the next. So just kind of take everything I'm about to throw at you and go from there. But one way you could structure sessions is to focus on either the past, the present, or the future. And you could do all of that in one session, or you could just focus on one for the session. So when talking to a client about the past, some of the topics that you could hit on would be stuff like, the obvious therapy question, like, tell me about your childhood. But dig into more specifics. How were you disciplined? Did your family eat dinner together? Like have them really paint a picture for you of what their childhood looked like. Did they fight with their siblings? Did they have friends? Did they do extracurricular activities? What were their grades like? Did they ever have issues focusing in school? Did they get their homework done on time, or were they a procrastinator? Are they a visual learner or a tactile learner or an auditory learner? All of these things not only give you some background on the client, but may also help you dictate how you move forward with your sessions with them. So it's really helpful. You may want to ask them questions about like attachment, and that'll help guide future sessions as well. Like, tell me about your relationships. What did they look like? How did you feel when someone left? How did you feel when you weren't around them? How did you feel, blah, blah, blah. You just kind of ask them a lot of questions related to attachment. You may want to dig into a little bit about their personality. What were you like as a kid? Were you really outgoing? Were you shy? And you can ask something broad as like, what were you like as a kid? And sometimes clients will be like, what do you mean? Like, I was like pretty normal. Then throw out some examples. Again, were you shy? Were you really outgoing? Did you raise your hand in class and answer questions if you knew the answer to them? Give them some type of something to go off of, because some of these questions can be kind of broad. And if this is their first time in therapy, or the first time they're even talking about some of these topics, they're not going to know where to go. So that it puts all the pressure on us. But that's fine. We're supposed to be guiding the sessions at points. So yeah, ask them certain things like that. Did they have medical issues? What was their appetite as a kid? Were they super picky, or did they try everything? What were some of their goals as a kid? What did they dream about being when they were older? What was like their fantasy life as a kid? They want to grow up and have the big house and the pool, or, did they already grow up in that type of environment? So they wanted like travel and freedom. Having some of that background for them as a kid is going to let you know, like, if there's anything that you need to dig into more with them, or if maybe some of the past is a source, or maybe the foundation of some of like the current stress that's going on, or maybe there's some goals or dreams that they had as a kid that they've really pushed aside for a long time, and that's something to kind of circle back to now in their sessions with you. So when you're doing some of that, you may want to do something like a genogram. So you may want to have like a chart you're making, or like a family tree, something like that, where you're like, okay, well, let's paint a picture of what your family was like. So who was in the house, and like, did you have your grandparents involved, and have them draw out this tree with you, or like a family map of who everybody is. And then you can kind of go through their relationships with each of those people, and that might tell you a lot. And you can have them even like paint a picture of like, hey, is there a character in like a movie or a show or something like that that kind of represents who you were as a kid? Or, what were some of your favorite songs as a kid? Like, what kind of music were you into? Did that affect how you dressed? Because a lot of kids at that age, what they like really, really influences how they look. So any of those things will help you paint a picture and understand a little bit more about who that person was and what they've been through. So that gives you a better foundation for that person. And there's almost always going to be something that you could pull out of that as a therapist. There's lots of info and things that you can get from that. Did they, if they had a lot of friendships and they were really social then, but they're not now. What changed? So definitely dig into the past. And sometimes in the beginning sessions, as you're still getting to know them, that's what you can tell them, right? It's like, hey, we got your whole history last time, like a little bit of everything. But to get to know you more, I want to know a little bit more about like how you grew up. Like, how did you become this person? So what made you who you are today? And then ask some of the family questions. The other thing you could focus on is the present, right? Like they came to you in the present because something is likely presently going on that they really want to address. So you can ask them questions. They're going to be kind of similar to the ones you would ask about the past. So you would ask them stuff about like relationships, right? Like what's their history of romantic relationships? What kind of friendships do they have? Who is their support group? You can ask them about work or school. You know, what does that look like for them? Do they enjoy their job or their classes? Is this a place that they want to continue to be, or do they want to branch out in some way? If they do, what's holding them back from doing that? You could ask them obviously about family. Like, who do you talk to frequently from your family? Who are you close with? If you have them do the map from before, you know, you can have them pull that out now. And be like, okay, well, you know, here's just what we did about the past. So who on here do you still speak to, or how would you rate your closeness with each of these family members? So that'll kind of give you more info about what's going on and what their life looks like now, which is helpful. You can dig into more about the symptoms, you know, so if it's like, hey, so you've mentioned that you have a lot of anxiety. Are there certain places that you've noticed the anxiety gets worse? And see, is it in crowds? Is it with new people? Is it when they're giving presentations? Is it during confrontations? So it's going to really help you as a therapist narrow down more of the possible goals that they may want to work on, or help them start to see some patterns like, well, you said when you were a child that you were the class clown, and now you're a lot more reserved. So what situations do you think contributed to that change? So there's lots of stuff you can pull. You may want to know more about the present. Like you don't want to ever ignore the physical symptoms, because sometimes for clients, they may not fully understand or have the language to talk about their emotions, but they'll know the physical. So they might be like, yeah, I just haven't been sleeping that great. So then you can talk about that. Well, when did you notice that the sleeping changed? What did you used to sleep like? How many hours? What are you doing now before bed? And you can work with them on sleep hygiene. You can see if they're having racing thoughts before bed. Talk to them about appetite. Has their appetite changed? Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse? When did that change? What does it look like now? Where do they want it to be? So definitely look at some of the physical symptoms. Also, because there may be some actual physical things going on. And so if you're only looking at the mental health side of stuff, you're ignoring this entire other aspect of who they are, and you may eventually hit a wall. There may be like genuinely a hormonal issue or something that's happening, and the more work you do with them, they may get frustrated that things aren't getting as better as they thought they would. They're not getting much better. And so I think it will be nice for you to know more about their health. Also make them more aware of their health, because most people ignore it. Like they just keep it moving. So you have to look at the person as a whole. So what are they eating? You know, I've worked with people who've been like, gosh, I have so much anxiety. I have a really hard time sleeping. And then we talk about what they were eating or drinking, and they're like, well, yeah, I have like 3 Monsters a day. I'm like, that's a lot of energy drinks. It's a lot of sugar. That's a lot of caffeine. That's a lot of not good stuff you're putting in your body. And then you're wondering why your anxiety's higher or why your heart's racing. So sometimes they're not even aware of some of these links that may seem kind of basic to us, but some people are just like out here living life and they're not really aware of all of these things that are connected. So definitely address some physical issues. Talk to them about coping skills. What do you do when you're stressed out? When you've had a bad day? When you need to relax? When you can take a vacation? You know, dig into that stuff too. So maybe they don't have a lot of coping skills, or maybe the coping skills they have aren't really healthy. And you now know, like, that's something that we need to work on for future sessions. Ask them too about like fears. What are they scared of? What are some of their insecurities? What are the things about themselves that they really don't love or would want to change? But then on the flip side, like, what are the things they really love about themselves? You know, you want to teach the client that therapy is not just about the negative. We are not just going to sit in here and every session talk about all the problems and all the things that are going wrong. because who wants to get like beat up every session? Like, even though we're coming from a positive place, like they're going to need some kind of break. So if you are helping them like retrain their brain to like look at not just the negative, but let's balance it with some of the positive too, you are teaching them like a really valuable kind of behavioral skill. But also maybe you're giving them some kind of praise or helping acknowledging the parts of themselves that they like, maybe nobody else has really praised them for, or they haven't heard some of these good things in a long time or thought about them. So definitely look at not only the negative, but some of the stuff that they like about themselves too. So some things you could have them do in the present, like activities or something along those lines, is, you know, write out a list of coping skills. Have like, depending on how much they're struggling with like suicidal ideation or in a deep depression or they have panic attacks, make a safety plan with them. You know, if something happened today, like who would you call? What coping skills could you use? How would you handle it? And work on a safety plan to address some of the present stuff. You can have them as like homework or in session, write out some of their, the things that they've been putting off. Maybe there's health appointments they've been putting off. Maybe they have been wanting to call their mom more and they don't. Maybe they want to get back in the dating scene, you know, so you can have them focus on some of that. Which that leads me to the next part of what you can talk to them about, which is future stuff. Talk about goals. If you've studied anything with like solution-focused therapy, it's like that miracle question, which is if you could wake up tomorrow and have everything you wanted in your life and it looks perfect, what would it look like? So ask them that question and then really pull it apart. What would your financial situation look like? What would your romantic life look like? What would your social life look like? What would your hobbies look like? What would your sleep look like? Because the more you know about where they want to be, the more you as the therapist can direct sessions to be closer to that goal or those multiple goals if they have it. And if you write them down with them or have them write them down, it gives you a reference point. So sometimes in sessions, I've seen this a lot with my clients, like they can be very present focused, especially if there was a lot of stuff that's just like not going well in the present. Their job sucks, they're fighting a lot with their spouse. Then it turns into, most sessions end up being just about the present. And sometimes you as a therapist kind of lose sight of what you're actually working on. Like you don't want to only be in crisis management all the time. And you're like, we're kind of putting out a fire every session, but we're not actually getting anywhere. So by having them identify some of their future goals, it's something you could pull out 6 months later and be like, hey, well, here were some of the things that you wanted to work on, and we need to revisit them. So which one do you want to focus on first? And have that be the focus for a couple sessions. I think that can be helpful. Ask them too about, you know, their family life, their confidence, you know, where would they want all of that to be? Who do they want to be? So that gives you, again, a better idea of where they want to work towards, where they want to go, but also kind of where their thought process is at. What do they feel like they're missing now that they can't have those things? And all of that will help direct future sessions. So definitely focus on the future stuff too. So some tips for sessions. If you ever feel stuck, if you're like, this client came in, they're not really giving me much today, they're not really talking, I'm not really sure like where to go from here, it's really helpful to have either like a physical file, if you're doing in-person sessions, of different like handouts, worksheets, stuff like that could get the session moving, or have like PDFs or something saved on your computer that you can immediately email them in session and be like, hey, let's work on this together. So you could say something like, it seems like today's just a little bit tougher trying to figure out exactly what direction to go or what to talk about. And that's okay. So I have an idea of something that we could work on that may get the conversation started and like get your brain going. And so that's when you may pull out a handout on negative thought patterns. So there's a website called Therapist Aid. I'll link it below. And they have a ton of worksheets for free that can really help when you're stuck or can help as homework for clients. So maybe you're like, all right, let's pull out this negative thought handout today and then let's go through the whole thing. And you tell me which of these thoughts you've had. So if there's one of them that's like, I'm not good enough, be like, all right, well, tell me a time that you felt that. Is that something that you feel frequently? How often? And like really like start going deeper and deeper into that one specific thought. Worksheets will be your friends. After you've been a therapist for a while, or with clients that they're really in your niche and you feel like the conversation flows, you won't really need those materials as often. But in the beginning, especially if you're seeing like multiple types of populations, like I know in community mental health, I would have a 4-year-old, and then the next session I would have like a 56-year-old going through a divorce, and then I would have like a teenager in a group home, and then I would have like a mom of 3 kids. And so it was just like all over the place, kind of like whiplash. So it'd be like, okay, I'm on the floor playing Uno with this kid, and then okay, I'm in the chair talking about like the aspects of divorce, and then I'm with this teenager hearing about who they were fighting with at school today. So like it's a lot. And so there's going to be times that client doesn't want to be there, they're not having a great day, you don't really know where to go, and they're not giving you much, or they're just looking at you like, all right, you're the therapist, like what are we doing today? So worksheets will be your friend. Another thing that you could do is like a thought log, and have them write down like a couple of the thoughts that they've had this week that kept them up at night, or thoughts that they couldn't shake, or things that they've been like hyper focused on, and go from there. You could have them do between sessions, especially if it's a client who's a little more difficult. They don't come in with a lot of stuff to talk about. There's different apps. There's one called Dailyo, and I'll link that one too below. But that is something that clients can use to track their symptoms. So if they can set reminders, or sometimes they'll have like notifications, they can go in there and they can just like mark what their mood is. So by the time they see you next week, they will hopefully have at least a few days worth of data to be like, oh yeah, I had a bad day last Tuesday. Okay, well, why did you mark that you were down that day? What was going on? And so it really helps to have them do a little bit more of that like legwork in between sessions. You can have them do some journaling too, which is along the same lines. I know a lot of my younger clients, or ones who really don't like writing, I just tell them, go in the notes section of your phone and keep like a couple different bullet points of stuff that's happened that you want to talk about in therapy. Because sometimes people get there, and I swear for almost all my clients, it's like something happens the day after we meet, and now we've got like almost an entire week or 2 weeks to meet. So by the time we do meet, they're like, I know something happened that I wanted to talk to you about, but I can't exactly remember what it was. So encourage clients to kind of keep notes, bullet points, whatever it is, journal, however it works best for them, but have them keep a couple notes too, so then it's not all on you. You can also have them do like some sort of like coping skill list, and have them practice that in between sessions, and then each session like have them practice one skill, and then practice it between sessions, and then the next session you pick up on that. So sometimes assigning homework, but not too much. Know your audience. Like if you've got a college student who's bogged down with multiple classes, they probably shouldn't have another homework assignment from you. But if you can, and it's a client that's workable, have them do something like that in between sessions, because then you can pick up each session with, okay, so how'd that skill work? Where did you need it this last week? How often did you use it? Did it help? Stuff like that. Another thing is silence. This is like a big topic, especially as a newer therapist, because silence is scary. You kind of expect when you're in sessions that it's going to be like talking. Okay, bye. Like you pick up next time. But like I mentioned earlier, there's going to be some clients who really aren't big talkers, or they're not fully ready to dig in to all of the stuff, like the deep stuff they need to work on. So they may be spending half the session talking to you about like what they cooked this week and where the best place is to get the best ingredients. And you might be like, all right, well, that's not really what we're here for, but it's building rapport too. So some clients are like a little bit slower to start. So for you as a therapist, understand that silence is a tool that you can use. If they're quiet and they don't really know where to go, you give them some options. They're not really picking anything up. They're not really engaging much. You can say something like, okay, yeah, then if I can see that you're not super into the session today, so you can directly ask them like, well, what's going on? Or you could just be like, yeah, so we'll just sit here for a little bit and color. Especially if they're younger. We'll sit here and color. We'll just kind of hang out in the same space. And then when you're ready to talk, we can. And you can leave it at that. I've had clients who've had like big outbursts because the second they come in the session, they don't know how to regulate their emotions and they're just going off about whatever's happened that day or that week. And I sat there and been like, get it all out. You know, as a therapist, you do not need to fix everything. And you don't have to have the right answer for everything. And you don't have to fill every second of the session with some big insight you've had, or, you know, just random words you're throwing out there, or exercises you're making them do. Like, silence is cool. Sometimes you may ask a question and they may be like, I don't know. And you just sit there. Give it like a minute. Sometimes if they're uncomfortable with the silence, they'll start filling it. And then they'll give you more to work with. Other times they're just going to be like, cool, and you're going to feel like it's a standoff. And then you can decide what to do with that. Another thing to remember too is like, you don't need to take up the whole hour. So I know that people say like the therapy hour, for some people that's 50 minutes on the therapist side. Some people, they have 45-minute sessions. Some people have an hour and a half sessions if it's like an intensive or something. So, you know, if you're with a client and they're not really talking or sharing, they're having a terrible day and they're really not wanting to participate in sessions, you've tried what you can, then let them go early. I know with insurance, it kind of sucks to do that sometimes, because typically most insurances, like, you have to put in a code, like a CPT code, which each code relates to a set of minutes. So if it's like a 90837 code, that means that you saw them for 53 to 60 minutes. And those sessions are going to pay more than the 45-minute sessions or the 30-minute sessions. So sometimes you end up taking a pay cut. If it's been 30 minutes, they're not participating and you're like, all right, we're good. Gotta let you go. Sucks, because now you don't get that full payment. But at the end of the day, like, I mean, the insurance stuff, I have my own issues with that. It's annoying to me. But you don't want to keep them there just to like run out the clock. You don't want to keep them there and risk like rupturing that therapeutic relationship. So sometimes if it's like really difficult, give them the option. Like, if you want to end now, we can. If you want to just sit in the space, you've got the hour, then we'll sit here together. If it's a day you don't really want to talk and you just kind of want to color or draw, or, you know, some of the adults would love coloring. So, I mean, I do because I can't draw, but, you know, have them do something like that, because sometimes that's therapeutic in itself, just sitting there with somebody. So give them those options too, but you do not need to take up the entire hour. Sometimes it's better for them and for you. Maybe the first half an hour was really intense and they're just trying to calm down and cope for the last bit, and you end up having like a 40-minute session. That's okay. So if you can get comfortable with not using the entire hour, and probably more importantly, you can get comfortable with silence. You know, sometimes we'll ask a question and the client will answer and we think that they're done with the answer. So we're quick to be like, oh, and then, and what about? So if you can, just practice like spacing out how much you interject. So if a client shares, count in your head like 5 seconds or so, and like a 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, like a long 5 seconds, and see if they have anything else to share. And if you start talking and they start talking, immediately defer to them. No, you go ahead. I want to hear what you have to say. And put it back on them. So I know that's a lot of info thrown at you guys today. And I'm sure there's going to be other times that we come back to this, because this is just a super basic overview of what to talk about in sessions with your clients. But you'll find your rhythm. It's hard when you're new, or you're in a new place, or you're working with a new population. Even sometimes when you've been doing this for a while, you're going to get a client every once in a while that you're like, oh, yeah, I have no clue what to do here. I have to start all the way over, or this one's hard. And you find yourself feeling a little bit lost. I mean, it's like the downside of working with people sometimes is it's not predictable. The upside is it's really cool. And when you're doing good work, it's super rewarding. So if you can, like I said, have a couple worksheets at hand. Look at some of the links I'll post below. That may be good homework assignments. or things that clients can do between sessions, or you can encourage them to do during or in sessions, and build that confidence. You know, it'll get easier with time. So hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Hope it was helpful. If there's any other questions or things you guys have, feel free to post them in the comments and see what we can do for future episodes. But other than that, subscribe and keep in contact with everything that's going on in this channel. And I'll see you soon. Thanks.